Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone, we are from 12 group. We will discuss about decentring, deconstructing the structure of knowledge, structure, sign, and play in the discourse of the human science. And the contents are, the first one is explain and elaborate the following term: structure, center, episteme. The second one is describe the history of science as a series of substitution process of center for center. And then the next one is what is meant by cultural universal. And then how can we determine that truth is not a cultural universal? The fifth is what is meant by freeplay. And the last one is describe the process of decentring, deconstructing the knowledge. The first one is structure. What is structure? As we know that human thinking style is influenced by structural language. Structure is considered as something coherent, definite, absolute, and ultimate. According to Derrida, the concept of structure that has dominated Western science and philosophy has always been referred to as a center or a point of presence, a fixed origin. Page 244. It would be easy enough to show that the concept of structure and even the word structure itself are as old as the episteme, that is to say, as old as Western science and Western philosophy, and that their roots thrust deep into the soil of ordinary language, into whose deepest recesses the episteme plunges to gather them together one more, making them part of itself in a metaphorical displacement. Page 244 until 245. The concept of structure is as old as episteme or knowledge. Scientific knowledge becomes everyday language, our everyday language. So, because of that, we are used to science. As in writing, we believe that writing is something structured. In Western philosophy, it is interpreted as logocentrism, which is believed to be the certainty of structure. And that's why Derrida is annoyed. How can someone believing something with only one source of truth? Then, what is center? The center, says Derrida, is the point at which any substitution or permutation of elements or terms is no longer possible. Page 244. Although the structure thereby depends on the center itself is fixed and escapes structurality, since it is beyond the transformative reach of other elements in the structure. Even every word or sentence spoken by someone can be the center and can be the meaning. And center also called by event, which is mean center structure. The center is at the center of the totality, and yet since the center does not belong to the totality, is not part of the totality has its center as well. Page 245. So what about episteme? Foucault defines episteme as a mode of observing and comprehending reality. Humans of all ages interpreted reality differently. As a result, humans communicate about it in a certain way. Discourse refers to how humans communicate about reality. As mentioned earlier, this episteme is as old as Western science and Western philosophy in thought. Next is about history of science as a series of substitution process of center for center. We can say that science being a series of substitution process of center for center, it's because, as I've mentioned before, that science being our everyday language, science coexists with us in our daily lives. From the basis of what we therefore call the center, and which, because it can be either insider or outsider, is as readily called the origin as the end, as readily arc as telos. The repetition, the substitution, the transformation, the permutation are always taken from a history of meaning or sense. That is a history period whose origin may be revealed or whose end may always be anticipated in the form of presence. If this so, the whole history of the concept of structure must be thought of as a series of substitution of center for center, as a linked chain of determination of the center. And then what is meant by cultural universal? In the elementary structures, he begins from his axiom or definition that belongs to nature, which is universal and spontaneous, not depending on any particular culture or on any determinate norm. That belong to culture, on the other hand, which depends on a system of norms regulating society and is therefore capable of varying from one social structure to another. Page 251. These two definitions are of the traditional types, but in the very first page of the elementary structures, Levi Strauss, who has begun to give this concept as an acceptable standing, encounters what he calls as a scandal is the insect prohibition. The insect prohibition is universal. In this sense, one could call it natural, but is also a prohibition, a system of norms and interdicts. In this sense, one could call it cultural. Cultural universals are described as everything that is shared by all human cultures on the world yet differs from one to the next, such as values and patterns of conduct.
Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Shahnaz Raina Azzahra. I am going to explain about the truth is not cultural universal. Okay, for the fourth question is how can we determine the truth is not cultural universal? In page 251, let us assume, therefore, that everything universal in man derives from the order of nature and is characterized by spontaneity, that everything which is subject to a norm belongs to culture and presents the attributes of the relative and the particular. We then find ourselves confronted by a fact, or rather an ensemble of facts, which in the night of presenting definition. Okay, a truth is floating, which means it is not fixed on just one point or one view. Truth means that a person has their own view of truth because of the experiences that they have experienced or read their own situations. Okay, for the next question, I am going to explain about the meaning of freeplay. In page 263, as a turn toward the presence, loss or impossible of the absent origin, the structuralist thematic of broken immediateness is thus the sad, negative, nostalgic, guilty, Rousseau's facet of the thinking of freeplay, of which the Nietzschean affirmation, the joyous affirmation of the freeplay of the world, and without truth, without origin, averred to an active interpretation would be other side. This leads to and governs this coherence of system, the center of the structure, allowing you to freeplay with totally free elements. This idea of structure has no central point which represents the conceivable. Okay, for the core, in this case means that they determine their own truth without participating in or following the truth of other people's views. Okay, for the last question, describe the process of decentering, deconstructing the knowledge. In the page of 263, there are more than enough indications today to suggest we might preserve that these two interpretations of interpretation, which are absolutely irreconcilable, even if we leave them simultaneously and reconcile them in an obscure economy together, share the field which we call in such a problematic fashion the human science. This construction theory begins by focusing on language because the ideas and the concepts are expressed through language. Language has priorities and interests. The modern opinion shows that the first word becomes the pillar and principle for the next thing. This theory is often misunderstood as an attempt to criticize the problem of literary works, reading texts, and ancient texts. Derrida refutes this with evidence that he took an active part in opposing apartheid, human rights violations, and he supported the feminist movement. Derrida's school also said that the method of deconstruction can also be applied to social, political, cultural, and other issues. Many people do not agree with the existence of this deconstruction concept because the concept tends to be considered inconsistent and doesn't have firm principle. In his opinion, this concept can overcome the problems in modern society which are trapped by the truth that only one way, and holds the view that the one-way truth is the result of capitalism and is forced in a totalitarian way to various aspects of life and infiltrated through the language used by humans. Western philosophers often favor logocentrism. The logocentrism tradition emphasizes the tendency of binary and hierarchy thinking. Logocentrism assumes that the former is source or the center of truth, while the latter is the periphery of truth, and it is always marginal when compared to the initial or the first concept. Moreover, logocentrism is synonymous with the concept of totality and the concept of essence. The concept of totality states that truth is one, while the concept of essence states about the basis of something on knowledge. The Western philosophers put more priority on the theory of logocentrism because it emphasizes the tendency to thinking in a binary and hierarchical way. For the core, the text is not only understanding by its text, but in the object side. If in the analysis, the author only explains why they wrote it, but in Derrida's view, it adapts to the times. The view of its meaning will also be different.